Oh, there's a solar storm going on right now. There are solar flares that are coming to Earth. This is the origin of a sunspot on the sun. As you probably know, some of these storms have already hit the Earth, right? Last night, Friday night, May 10th, 2024, the aurora across the world, but especially in Europe and America, North America, Canada, United States especially, was very visible. Many people probably went out and saw it, perhaps including you. However, there are more solar storms coming. In fact, that's not the end of it. In fact, there's many more over the next 48 to 72 hours or so. And in this video, I'm going to break down what these solar storms mean for the immediate near future, but far more importantly, what does this mean for the long-term future? And I really believe that the emotional reaction we have individually and globally the next few days is really going to determine if the next time this happens, how bad of a crisis it's going to be. So again, for context, before we get into all that, we have to elaborate. How big are these storms? Okay, this is a two-scale image representation. We have a coronal mass ejection, otherwise known as a CME, from the sun compared to Earth to scale in the bottom right here. So there's Earth, a little blue dot, to scale against one of these coronal mass ejections. Okay, the sunspot that is causing these solar storms of the last few days and of the next few days is 16 times the size of Earth, and these coronal mass ejections obviously are multiples the size of Earth, right? And as I post on my Twitter page just recently, a few moments ago, and as I described, I believe the next 72 hours are critical in defining the next decade, right? And so there are things that are outside of our control, right? Obviously, the sun is outside of our control, but there are many things in our control. And the next 72 hours are not critical because of the things outside of our control. They're critical because it determines how we take action forward with the things that are in control. So, of course, the first question, is this going to be bad enough that it's comparable to the Carrington event of 1859? No, it does not seem that way. It's still, from everything I read and everything I'm reading online, it seems like that this storm is not going to be catastrophic. It's not going to be critical. It's going to mess with GPS systems. It's going to mess with some other things, but this is not going to cause global blackouts. It's not going to cause the entire hemisphere that it's hitting to have significant catastrophic problems, right? This is a very low G5 storm and G4 storm, but it's not an exceedingly high G5 storm like the Carrington event of 1859, right? So again, if that were to happen, that would be a crisis. Okay, this is not that. Okay, we are not looking at some critical event like that as of now. However, this solar cycle is not over. The solar cycle ends in October of, I believe, this year. It's either this year or next year, but ends in October. So we have at least another year of solar activity, the significant solar activity, right? In fact, it is commonly understood, and my understanding is that solar storms actually pick up on the backside of solar peak, right? So we have peak in October, and then in the 6 months or so immediately after that is when we have maximum solar activity, right? So this potentially cannot even be the strongest part of the solar cycle that we're seeing, right? And so my point in making this video, my point in talking about this is because we have not learned from history. And this is extremely concerning to me. This is one of the largest concerns I have for the future, right? Again, let's go back to history. The Carrington event of 1859 was so strong that sparks flew from doorknobs. Telegraph workers were able to use power from the air while their batteries were disconnected, and railroad tracks were turned into electromagnets. Okay, this is really strange for us to conceptualize, but these are things that happen. Okay, you can read about it. It's very, very fascinating. If you want to read about it, I highly encourage you read the Wikipedia page about it or other websites, or there are plenty of videos online about this too, but it's very fascinating, right? We have a very difficult time of trying to imagine what that would like, but imagine having so much charge in the atmosphere, so much charge in the world that a doorknob is sparking, right? When you touch it, static electricity, all those kinds of things. It's just really, really crazy to think about that, right? So again, this is not that kind of level, right? No, nobody's doorknobs are sparking yet, right? So, so this is definitely not that, but this definitely could happen again, okay? And if it were to happen again, a storm of that size would destroy the grid, right? This little picture here is a picture from someone that experienced the event in 1859, and this is their depiction of the aurora in the sky. And so, we like to think that, oh, well, that was just, a crazy fluke, right? But the point of making this video today is that this is not a crazy fluke. This sounds like science fiction, but it is entirely plausible, possible, and some would say inevitable, okay? There was a massive solar storm, more powerful than the Carrington event in 2012, only 12 years ago, that missed Earth's path by 9 days. Okay, this picture is from that specific event. Okay, we're hit by solar storms all the time. And even if there's only a 1 in a century kind of events like this, it is still a significant risk. Okay, again, there was a storm more powerful than the Carrington event 1859, where the aurora borealis was visible in the Caribbean, where doorknobs were sparking, railroad tracks were electromagnetized, and telegraph workers were getting shocked from their machines and also didn't have to use their batteries to transmit messages. Okay, that's how powerful these storms are, and one more powerful than that missed Earth by 9 days, because we have our orbit going around the sun, obviously, right? And when one of these CMEs blasts out into the solar system, blasts out into space, it either hits or misses our orbit, and we only missed it by 9 days. So this could happen again. It could happen this decade. It can happen another decade. But I think our reaction to this event this weekend is probably, this seems like a pretty close call in my view, right? This seems like a very, very strong one that's strong enough to warrant people's attention and interest and action without actually causing damage. Perhaps 2012 was the first warning shot we're getting from the sun. Perhaps this one in 2024 is the second warning shot we're getting from the sun. And my worry is that one of these times we are not going to get any more warning shots. We're going to get a kill shot that's going to fry a significant fraction of the global grid, right? And so let's ask the question. Why do we not pay attention to that, right? If there was a cybersecurity bug, like something that the government developed, okay, if there was a war going on, or if there was an asteroid that missed Earth by 9 days, that risked wiping out half of electric infrastructure on, a significant fraction, potentially up to half of the planet, okay, there'd be a mass panic and fear, okay? If there was a asteroid that flew by Earth that was large enough to destroy a large city and kill, let's say, 10 million people or so, if that flew by the Earth and missed us by 9 days, we would have active efforts to mitigate more asteroids, right? It would be a more conscious understanding. More people would care about it. But the reality is that those asteroids haven't been near Earth. Even if they did hit Earth, it's exceedingly low probability to hit Earth in the precise spot where they could wipe out, let's say, a New York-sized city level, right? Far more likely it's going to hit the ocean, over 70% probability it's going to hit the ocean, right? But we look at the solar storm here. Okay, if a solar storm were to happen, even a relatively minor one, even not one significantly larger than the Carrington event, we could be looking at millions, if not tens of millions of people dying, starving, or suffering from either localized or widespread electric grid failures, right? And so my point is that we're not good at evaluating risk, right? We talk all about war. We talk all about various social issues, but this whole EMP/coronal mass ejection issue is one of those things that personally I've thought about for years, because it's one of these things that is also a real risk, but because it's intangible to human brains, we just ignore it. Or we like to doomsday and fearmonger it to where actually we make it more probable. We'll get to that in more just a moment, right? So this is abstract, right? Nuclear war is not as abstract, right? An asteroid, is not as abstract, even though both come from space. An asteroid's a rock. We can understand a rock. Big rock, go fast, kill things. We understand that, something like this, electromagnetism and this and that and the other electric, right? Most people don't understand how electricity works. So how are they going to understand why this is a problem, right? And so our brains are not designed to understand solar problems, right? Now, why are our brains not designed to do that? It's because technology is inherently changing faster and faster, more and more, the problems that we face, right? We have less in common technologically with the future than the past. I made this very clear. If you want to read more about it, you can read this thread here that I have. It's one of the ones I posted. I think it was the first. Yeah, it was the first one I posted all the way back in 2023 on this subject. But anyway, my point is that as we unlock new technological upgrades to the world, we unlock new potential risks, right? Let's take the Black Death as an example. Okay, the Black Death, or the bubonic plague in Europe, was a critical event. Okay, a third or half of Europe died. A significant fraction of the continent of Europe was just wiped out. Was the Black Death an apocalypse? No. Did the world continue onwards? No. If we look back, is it truly astounding that even though we had this massive dip in human population, in fact, one of the only dips in human population in all of human history, that we recovered in mere decades or a century or so? Yes, it's remarkable. Yes, it's incredible that millions died and that humans continued onwards, right? And I believe it's the same kind of issue here that we're looking with the solar storm, right? Is a solar storm going to end the world? No, absolutely not, right? But is it enough to cause a kind of Black Death-esque disaster? Yeah, I think it definitely could. And in the same way that Europe of medieval times didn't have that problem of a widespread global, quote unquote, global pandemic until we unlocked the technology to create large cities, It's the same thing with solar storms. For thousands of years, humans did not have to worry about bubonic plague going from China to Europe, because what on earth is going to go from China to Europe? But you unlock technology, you build the cities, you create the shipping routes, you create very congested urban populations. All of a sudden, you've unlocked a new potential risk, a plague, right? And it's the same thing that we're looking at with the solar storm here. We are not yet adjusted to understanding the risks of solar storms, because even if these solar storms happen every 100 years, every couple of 100 years or so, for thousands of years, we can just ignore it. It doesn't matter. But now, only in the last 100 years or so, we have actually adopted the electric grid to a point where it is critical for billions of people living, right? So as we unlock the risks of solar storms, we have not had our brains unlock that understanding that with these new responsibilities come these new risks, right? So again, we cannot control the sun, and I don't recommend we try to do that, right? There are people that want to block out the sun for climate reasons. Like, I don't think that's a good idea. But there are very legitimate, very pro-human, pro-energy ways at which we can take precautions against this, right? And I believe that there's one technology in particular that consists with this. You probably know what I'm referring to. So the first thing we need is a decentralized electric grid, right? We need the electric grid, and this is not just true of solar storms. This is true for a wide variety of reasons, right? We want a decentralized electric grid to protect against war, right? If there's going to be a war, we want to make sure to minimize the possibility of having very strategic strike zones for very centralized electric grids, right? We want as decentralized of electric grids as possible, so that if there are EMPs, if there are CMEs like the ones we're seeing right now, or dozens of other potential issues, we want decentralized electric grids. They are not decentralized enough. We do everything we can to do that. Okay, the second thing we need is a variety of energy sources. In the same way we need to geographically decentralize the electric grid, we also need to decentralize the electric grid's energy sources, right? If we have a global electric grid that is entirely dominant on solar, that's a big problem when the sun is not shining today. If you have an entire electric grid dominant on coal, that's a problem when you run out of coal. If you have the entire electric grid dependent on one or two energy sources, that's a big risk. And so what we need is as many and a huge variety of energy sources as possible, so that if one event or another is going to happen, it isn't the end of the world, or isn't going to cause a critical problem, right? We can't have the whole world be reliant on one energy source, because if something were to happen to that energy source, even temporarily, even marginally, that could have cascading consequences down. So this is another thing we have to do, not just for solar storms, but in general, reduce the probability of asymmetric negative downside. Okay, we need to increase grid resiliency, right? This is something that we do need to have with our electric grids, right? President Obama, I believe in 2016, attempted to do that, although it wasn't sufficient, it wasn't enough. But other presidents have also tried to do it to lesser degrees, but we need to increase our grid resiliency, right? And we need to have as much energy storage as possible, as much energy savings as possible for all humans, right? We live in this world where 80% of the world's adults, 5.36 billion adults in the world, 80% of them don't have property rights. They don't have monetary rights. And so why, getting to step 5 here, why are they going to have the time horizon to be concerned about a long-term, multi-decade, potential risk of a solar storm, when in their immediate future, they have an exceedingly high risk they're not going to make next month's rent payment, right? When people look at these two things, they're inherently going to prioritize the one. And this is a very similar issue with the climate, right? Or very similar issue with the environment, right? We're not worried about the long-term future of lead poisoning on our children and grandchildren when we need the income today, we need the savings today. So actually, indirectly, and a second order effect, one of the best things we can do for the energy grid and for humanity as a whole is help people have economic means, help people have as much savings and storage as possible, and extend our time horizon, right? Obviously, one of the main fears people have with a solar event is that of not enough food, not enough food for all the mouths to feed if the grid were to go down, right? And if we increase people's energy storage, both in terms of monetary energy, but also in terms of food, if we decentralize agriculture, we decentralize farming, we actually reduce that risk, right? So see, this is not a one solution fixes all. This is a multi-solution. This is a problem that needs multiple solutions, right? We need more decentralized electric grids, more decentralized agriculture, more people, 5 times the people, 8 times the people, 10 times the people with property rights that we have today, with 10 times the savings that we have today. All these things together combined that are in our control reduce the negative consequences of the things that are outside of our control. Okay, so that's I think a really, really critical component. Now we get to away from the orange circle in the sky, and we get to the orange circle on the screen here. We get to Bitcoin, which a lot of people may not understand how we get there from the solar storm, but I believe it is really, really critical to a wide variety of consequences like this in the future, including solar storms. So let's break this down, right? Everything I'm describing here is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars of major investment, right? You do not upgrade the electric grid for free. You do not decentralize the electric grid for free. You do not innovate new energy sources or have new adoption of newer renewables energy sources. You don't have these things for free, right? These are extremely expensive. In fact, this is the largest prohibitor for the mass adoption of renewable energies. They're too expensive. Everyone is pro solar and pro nuclear and pro wind, but the problem is that these are extremely time consuming. They're extremely expensive. They have negative trade offs on the environment. They do, and we don't know how to mitigate those entirely. But the problem with these renewables is that even though one could debate if they have more positives than negatives on the environment, even if they do, then there's the big question of cost, right? And so all of these things are extremely expensive. And so, ironically, one of the best things we can do for the advocacy of renewable energy sources, one of the best things we can do for the advocacy of an increasingly decentralized electric grid, one of the best things we can do for helping people have more property rights and have more energy storage, one of the best things we can do, ironically, is monetize these things and make them profitable. It becomes a lot easier to build these things that we need if they're not going to be extremely expensive in the process, right? It's a lot easier to quit smoking if you have an economic incentive to do so. It's a lot easier to lose weight or to quit alcohol or whatever. It's a lot easier to do something that's painful if the transition from point A to point B has a monetary incentive along with it, or at the very least has a monetary incentive reducing the downside or the pain of getting from point A to point B, right? Okay, so the path can be greatly eased with a technology that makes that solution. Again, I argue that's Bitcoin, right? And a lot of people would find that strange. Most people aren't aware of the solar storm this weekend. Most people that are aware of the solar storm don't understand the serious risk that it or the future iterations of it pose. And far, far fewer people understand how Bitcoin's related to that. But I'm going to break that down of why I believe Bitcoin is really important. Okay. Bitcoin passively incentivizes an increasingly decentralized electric grid, chasing the cheapest energy sources, which are, again, typically renewables, with the largest variety of potential energy sources, right? It is impossible to harness the energy of a volcano and transfer that energy to humans. Why? Because volcanoes are so geographically isolated away from human populations, typically, if the humans are smart where they build, that it's not profitable to transfer energy from point A to point B, but introduce Bitcoin mining, which can absorb the excess energy that the grid, that the volcano is using consumes. Well, then all of a sudden, if it's profitable, well, now people are actually talking about it. This is what's happening in El Salvador. Yes, it's not happening. It's not close to being reality. Yeah, it's not. But it's actually in the conversation now, okay? And places where it's are happening are in Southern Africa, right? In Ethiopia, in Kenya, in South Africa, and other places in Africa. We have places that are adopting renewable energies, right? There are some places like Kenya, unfortunately, that just shut down hydroelectric plants in the last few weeks here because it's not profitable for people, right? The people there, frankly, are too poor. They can't afford the electricity, even though the electricity is already significantly cheaper than what it is here in the West. They can't afford it. And so because it's not profitable, nobody's willing to build the electricity for them, right? It's the same thing with banks. People in the West, we don't want to build the banks for people in Africa because why would a bank account with 1,000 times less money be economically viable? It's not economically viable. But you introduce Bitcoin mining to the hydroelectric power system, you bring Bitcoin mining to these things, and all of a sudden you have a major tenant, the Bitcoin miner, that's making the energy profitable, and you have the local population that can use the excess energy, right? So basically, you're building Bitcoin mines in these isolated locations, consuming that energy, again, typically renewables, because renewables on the long term are the cheapest, and that excess energy gets to go to the local population. If the local population needs it, you scale down the Bitcoin miners, right? Bitcoin mining is geographically independent, and it has instant demand response, right? And this is actually something we saw with the eclipse, which I'll get to that more in just a second. But this is why Bitcoin is really important in increasing that decentralization, right? Africa's energy grid could literally 100x in its capacity, right? Because so few people in Africa have electricity. And most of the people in Africa that do have electricity, especially in rural areas, only have the ability for a few generators or for light bulbs or for very basic necessities, right? Me, a spoiled rich American, you probably also someone in the spoiled West, we use 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times the electricity that millions, hundreds of millions of people, billions of people use around the world, right? And so having economic incentive to take away that that economic loss in building these plants for the world's poorest is incredibly important, right? Because if there were to be a solar event, who's going to suffer the most? the poor. And what are they going to suffer the most with? Food. And so having electricity for them is a way to mitigate one of those negative downsides, right? Also, Bitcoin encourages low time horizons for all, including energy savings and storage, right? If you are saving in a currency, like let's say the US dollar, political currency, you're thinking in terms of months or quarters or years, right? People in Bitcoin often planning in terms of Bitcoin cycles, which are 4 years or decades or centuries, right? And so extending your time horizon, all of a sudden, your risk profile changes. If you're in the political currency world, you're worried about interest rates for the next few months or the next few years, right? If you're in Bitcoin world, you're thinking about the long-term potential effects of various events in the world, right? People in Bitcoin talk about EMPs and CMEs and these solar flares way more than people outside of Bitcoin, right? Is because we're thinking in terms of decades. This solar flare that's happening this weekend, we may not get a Carrington level event for decades, but within Bitcoin, we can afford to think in decades because we have the monetary incentive to do so. And so adopting Bitcoin, I believe, will collectively extend time horizons for the world. And hopefully we will get more brilliance, more geniuses, and more innovation towards this area, which we desperately need, right? So again, does Bitcoin, magically fix everything? Is it a magic wand that fixes everything? No, I don't believe it is. Actually, I'm not a huge fan of that phrase personally, because there are lots of things that Bitcoin doesn't quote unquote fix, right? There are probably still going to be solar storms, probably, and they're probably still going to have negative consequences on the Earth, right? Okay, again, after all, as a little humbling reminder, this sunspot is 16 times the size of Earth. Okay, that's what's causing this that we're looking at right now. Okay, so Bitcoin does not stop things outside of our control, but Bitcoin does give an economic incentive to focus on the things we can control. Okay, bringing the world together globally with common incentives for everyone's best interest and a non-zero sum game solution. It can accelerate building towards a marginally better grid consistently over time, and hopefully minimize the negative downside or the negative consequences of these things that we cannot control, right? If we can make the next solar storm, 50% less bad than it could be, I still call that a win, right? And do everything we possibly can, right? And so my point in making this video is that this is, a very brief period of time, right? Many of you watching may not even watch my typical content, but you may only be clicking on this because you're looking for information on the solar storm. And this is why I believe the next 72 hours are critical for humanity. They're critical at defining the next decade and the next couple decades with what we do, right? Humans are very emotional creatures, right? And what you do right now in reaction to the warning shot will determine how you react in preparation to the kill shot, right? When you have a local bank insolvency that is warning you where, because there's smoke, that there's probably fire, that is your warning shot to prepare you to take action to protect against the kill shot that is the true banking run that takes your money, right? We only get so many shots of this. And when a warning shot comes, the best gift it has is the emotional cue to take action, right? That's why I believe this is important. If in the next few days we move on, we go to the next headline article, we just forget about it, just like we do with many wars, frankly, just like we do with many political issues. If we continue to have our 48 to 72 hour news cycle because of the TikTok, Snapchat, Twinstagram, whatever generation that you, me, and all of us have, right? If we just forget about this in the next few days, I think that is potentially the largest disaster of this event. Okay, the real problem of this weekend is not the solar storm. It's that by mid next week, we're probably going to forget that the solar storm happened, and we're going to forget that this could be a lot worse next time. And if not next time, it could be after that. But we've already had 2 warning shots within 15 years. It's something really to think about, right? And so that's why I believe this is really important, and that's my encouragement for this video. So now let's get back to Bitcoin and why Bitcoin as a global asset is really useful for protecting against these kinds of sources, right? So Bitcoin is so young. Again, it's only 15 years old, barely 15 years old. And yet as a global asset, it's so effective with its second order effects that number one, it is a leading way to mitigate methane emissions in the atmosphere, right? That's the chart we're looking at right here. I believe this is from ARK Invest. I don't remember. There wasn't a source on the chart. This is not my chart, but I've seen many like it. But Bitcoin is one of the main ways to mitigate methane emissions in the atmosphere, right? Again, methane emissions is similar to the solar storm in the idea that it is a problem, right? Releasing excess of methane is a problem. In fact, it's potentially a significantly larger problem than carbon, right? And again, this is a controversial issue I'm wading into, but everything is pretty much anymore. But Bitcoin is one of the ways to convert methane into carbon and thus have less of a negative externality into the environment, right? In the same way that I would say Bitcoin accelerating the grid stability to make a really bad solar storm event in the future less bad, I call that a win. In the same way, instead of releasing a bunch of methane, releasing a bunch of carbon in its place, a less bad alternate, is a significant win, right? And Bitcoin mining, along with solar panels, are some of the best ways to convert landfill methane into carbon, to convert flared methane into carbon, right? And this is just happening as the result of Bitcoin desiring to find the cheapest energy sources for mining, right? So another one is accelerating hydropower in impoverished areas. I already discussed this, right? Kenya is actively shutting down hydro plants for Kenyans, right? Some of the poorest people in the world globally, and yet we're actively shutting down energy for them because it's not profitable, right? Bitcoin reverses this trend, right? And there's another one. Many of you remember the very other recent celestial event of the total solar eclipse on April 8th, 2024 in the United States and southern Canada. And that Bitcoin is such an innovation for the electric grid that with its instant demand response, that in the 4 minutes of the sunlight collapsing and then returning because of the solar eclipse, Bitcoin instant demand response fixed that. You can't do that with aluminum smelting. Okay, you can't do that with sounding the alarm for everyone to turn off the air conditioners to stabilize the grid. You can't do those things in 4 minutes. You can do that with Bitcoin though. And so Bitcoin literally not only protects us against solar storm events, it also protects us against the much, much smaller negative consequences of total solar eclipses that are just mere minutes long. It's absolutely insane. But this is my point, is that if you want the evidence, you can go down a whole rabbit hole, but Bitcoin really does stabilize the grid. It really does help in these ways, right? So again, we are not doing this yet. We're not doing it because number one, the incentives are not there, okay? We can find lobbyists for war. We can find lobbyists for all kinds of other things, right? Things that are tangible, things we can understand, and things that frankly make money, right? There are no lobbyists for the sun or for protection against solar flares, right? And no one in the energy system is actively going to lobby for their own regulation and for their own increasingly expensive upgrades to the energy, to the grid that we need, right? Especially when it's extremely unprofitable to get there. And again, human brains are really bad at determining risk, right? Solar storms are extremely infrequent, yet a steady risk compounded over a long enough period of time that balloon into catastrophic events, right? This is asymmetric risk to the downside, right? And this is the kind of thing I talk about with Bitcoin all the time, right? The political currency you're using in community exchange could survive for years, right? The US dollar's been around for, a quarter of a millennia, basically. But yet it's continued to lose purchasing power indefinitely. The British pound has been around for over 800 years, and yet it continues to fall and fall and fall in purchasing power. Yet we still use the pound, we still use the US dollar because we're really bad at determining risk, right? And the same thing is true with Bitcoin self-custody. People that buy Bitcoin think that they have mitigated their risk because they bought Bitcoin, they're holding it on exchange. But Bitcoiners that are holding Bitcoin on exchange are no less guilty of completely misunderstanding the risk profile of the situation, just like people that don't buy Bitcoin, right? If you buy Bitcoin, you hold it on an exchange, you're at massive risk of the government confiscating the Bitcoin on that exchange, of a criminal or a thief somehow SIM card swapping you, getting your password, your information, or some sort of identity thief that takes your information, logs into your account, and withdraws your Bitcoin for you. I mean, there's so many risks that people expose themselves to, but because they are extremely massive consequence, but low probability over a long period of time, we procrastinate. And that's why I make these videos. That's why I talk about these things, because there's very little I can do that's within my control. But what is in my control is to encourage you, dear viewers, to understand that, oh, I'm really bad at associating risk. And oh, a really high potential downside that's a low probability over a long period of time means it's high risk and I should probably take it seriously. It does not matter if it's a solar storm. It does not matter if you're still using political currency. It does not matter if you have Bitcoin, but inferior storage solutions with single points of failure. All of these things together are the same thing. Humans are bad at evaluating risk, right? And we'll get to the 2020 example of that, which I've not brought up yet, but we will, right? So again, if the 2012 or the 1859 kind of event hit us, what actually would happen? What is that downside of risk that we're actually looking at? Well, half of the world would be just fine. We got to clear that up, right? If the solar storm hits us and the Western hemisphere is facing the sun, the Eastern hemisphere is not, it's basically entirely the Western hemisphere that's going to get fried, not the Eastern hemisphere, or vice versa, obviously, right? And just because, that hemisphere is hit does not mean the entire hemisphere is gone, right? There's a lot of variables, many of which I'm not qualified to elaborate on, but that's the first thing that we have to, um, you know, explain, right? The half exposed to it would lose the electricity. That would probably still be billions of people, even if it's the Western hemisphere. The best case scenario would be that the Pacific Ocean is facing the sun when this happens, right? If you've never looked at a globe, right, the Pacific Ocean is basically like half of the planet, right? The ideal scenario would be that hitting, that be facing the sun when the solar flares hit, right? That'd be the best case scenario. However, it's like throwing darts, right? We can't possibly know which of those is going to be until it happens, right? And a quick side note that's not in this thread here, we actually don't know how severe solar storms will be until they're approximately 1 million miles away, okay? The sun and Earth are 93 million miles apart. So we can see the solar flare much earlier, but we don't actually know the true impact of the solar flare until it is 92 out of 93 units of the way there, right? It crosses 92 million miles. We can see it. We can get a rough idea, but until it's only 1 million miles away, we actually don't know how significantly bad it's going to be. Okay, the warning we have is extremely, extremely short, right? Most people a few days ago, we're not thinking about solar storms, and then we got, basically a 10-hour notice that was going to be here, right? And so this is the concern. What if next time we get a 10-hour notice that hundreds of millions, if not billions of people are going to be without power, maybe for days, maybe for weeks, maybe for months, okay? It would cost trillions of dollars to repair, okay? Again, it's about asymmetric downside risk, right? It's going to take hundreds of billions of dollars to upgrade, but to fix it would cost potentially 5 times, 10 times, maybe 50 times as expensive to fix, right? Okay, and the real thing I care about, the real thing in making this video, why it's so important to me, why I talk about CMEs and EMPs all the time, or not all the time, but relative to the average person, quite frequently, is because probably millions or tens of millions would starve. Okay, almost entirely these people would be in the developing world, the precisely poorest places in the world, the places that are the most vulnerable, the places with the least infrastructure, right? And this is what we saw during 2020. This is what we saw during COVID, and this is why I viciously was against the lockdowns in 2020, is because when the West decides to shut down our economy, we're deciding to actively encourage starvation and famine in the developing world. 18 million people from 2020 to 2024 died. 18 million that statistically should not have. Now, official government reports have attributed about 6 million of those deaths to COVID. Now, maybe some people watching would say they don't trust those numbers. I think you have reason to trust them, but also a lot of reasons not to trust them. And again, it depends on which government we're talking about. But even if you want to say that, oh, they radically underestimated how many people died from COVID, that means there's 12 million people out there that died the last 4 years that should not have died. Where do you think those people died? Most of them were in the developing world. Starvation exploded in the last 4 years. Okay. Poverty exploded in the last 4 years. Okay. Here in America, when we decide to dampen ourselves a little bit, those effects are compounded onto the rest of the world, onto the developing world. And this is the concern I have. It's not even about the solar flare necessarily. It's not even about the virus. It's about the human reaction to it. If we have a virus like we did in 2020, the human reaction could be just as bad, if not worse. And quite literally, should not be controversial to say the human reaction to the virus in 2020 was worse on a human death toll level than the virus itself. More people died. Okay, 2 to 1 people died from non-virus reasons because of human action than virus reasons. You could attribute that to the starvation example like I'm giving. You can attribute that to depression, to suicide, to alcoholism. You can say, to vaccine injuries. Lots of things you could potentially attribute that to, and people have their own theories, right? I don't want to get into that in depth right now, but that's my point. Is that what if the solar storm in the next decade or so, the next couple of decades, what if it's not that bad, but the human reaction to it and human unpreparedness of the things that we actually could control, that is actually precisely what causes a significant event into a catastrophic event. Okay. Again, 18 million people died the last 4 years from a virus. Okay. How many people would die if we had just a mere few hundred million people without power for a few months, right? That would be disastrous. Okay. It is our responsibility as the global rich to build a future that, with that scenario being the lowest probability as possible, right? Now, again, this is the beauty with Bitcoin. If you're watching this video, you're probably in the global rich. You're probably pretty wealthy. You probably have internet connection. You probably have a roof over your head. You probably have food and water. Okay. Your biggest concern is, how do I save for retirement? not how do I make next month's rent payment, right? Because you're in a wealthy part of the world and you have a longer time horizon, right? So when you accelerate Bitcoin, when you buy Bitcoin, okay, you're advocating for these more sustainable electric grids, right? In a very small way, that's what you're doing, right? And equally as important, okay, not only are you protecting the collective in an extremely long time horizon, but you're also protecting yourself, the individual, in a much shorter time horizon, right? Okay, you're protecting yourself against the solar flare scenario of political currency, right? In the same way that a solar flare is slowly, then suddenly, and by the time that a solar flare is heading to Earth, you inherently no longer have the time to prepare against such an event. It's the same thing with political currency, right? That you think you have the time, oh, the currency's fine, and then all of a sudden you don't, you're out of time, right? It's the same kind of scenario, except again, one is for the whole planet and the other one is just for your own political jurisdiction. So, I think there's a lot of juicy metaphors they are combining or comparing the two, right? But I mean, it's the reality. This is what political currency debasement looks like. This is the US dollar, the best fiat currency, the best political currency on the planet in terms of Bitcoin. Okay, this is what the dollar looks like priced in Bitcoin since 2015. We're not even including the 2010 to 2015 5-year massive bull market for Bitcoin, but this is what the dollar looks like in terms of Bitcoin. The dollar is already basically dead. It's down 99.46% in the last 11 years alone, and it will fall another 99%. And so when you buy Bitcoin, you're also protecting against that, right? And so, regarding fear, fear is a scary thing, right? People don't like clickbait. They don't like greed and fear, but the reality is that humans are emotional creatures, right? And so I make my videos, I make my content, I make everything around these things, greed and fear, right? We don't take action unless we have an emotional feeling about something, right? And that's why the solar storm is important that we're going through right now. Not because the logic has changed at all. The logic is the same, but right now is a very brief window. These 72 hours, these few days, a very brief window where humans' emotions are peaked with this event, right? And that is the precise time where we can take action, right? And so likewise, fear is healthy, a healthy dose of fear, right? We need to take a healthy dose of fear towards the storm via cautious optimism and build to a future that poses smaller risk, right? But there is unhealthy fear too. I want to make that very clear, okay? Doomsdaying, as I like to call it, unhealthy fear actually increases the probability of disaster. And here's why. If you have a healthy fear of being obese, you decide to get in shape, you decide to work out, you decide to improve your life. If you have an unhealthy fear and you think it's hopeless and you think there's nothing you can do and that everything's outside of your control, you will continue being obese until you die. A very similar scenario we are experiencing with the climate. Most people in my generation think that the climate is so far gone. They think that the climate is so close to that doomsday scenario. They think it's so hopeless. They don't take action. They don't take proactive steps forward, which actually increases the probability of extremely bad environmental disasters, right? Deforestation, lead poisoning, a whole wide variety of things, right? And the same thing is true with solar storms, okay? Because we view solar storms as, oh, well, if a solar storm hits Earth, it's going to wipe out half the planet and 90% of the world's going to starve. It's going to be the apocalypse. So if we doomsday it and we over exaggerate the fears, that's actually counterproductive to the mission that we're actually trying to solve. If we make it seem like that if this event happens, that 90% of the world's going to die, blah, blah. No, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to take action against it because if it happens, it's so bad, there's nothing I could do to prevent negative externalities of it. Well, then we are inherently not going to do that. Okay, we need to take these things seriously. We need to have a healthy dose of fear without overreacting and having an overdose of fear, right? And if you don't believe me, again, let's look back to 2020. What was the deadlier thing? Was it the virus or was it people doomsdaying the virus? Okay, I remember in March of 2020, and now I'll get, I would be canceled at the time, and still I might be canceled, today, or some people would want to cancel me for saying this, but I remember back in March of 2020 when people legitimately thought for a brief period of time, or it was the end of the world, where people for a very brief period of time thought that we were going to see just complete disaster of the planet, right? And sure, that's always a possibility, but certain people were sure that was going to happen. And because they were so sure, they decided to take action and do things with our human insight because we had panic that were actually counterproductive. And so the best thing we can do to protect against all these things, climate, viruses, solar storms, and many other negative events, the best thing we can do is take logical action beforehand to prevent panic on the eve of it, right? If in the future we have a solar storm, or we have maybe a 12-hour notice, that like it's too late. But because we realize it's too late, we decide to panic. Okay, and this is why a healthy dose of fear is important. I like to say a healthy dose of fear with cautious optimism. I'm an optimist at heart, but I'm also a cautious optimist, right? We have less in common with the innovations of the future, kind of like the past had less in common with the electric grid of the future, but we have less in common with the disasters of the future, right? This is a verse from the Bible, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding, right? This is something that a lot of people don't understand. Why is fear of the Lord wisdom? Or why is the fear of the Lord beginning of wisdom? It's because fear is one of the ways, in fact, I would argue it's the main way at which we begin to attempt to understand something, right? And so it's that same kind of idea here in all these aspects that I'm talking about. So I encourage people, you're watching this, to consider buying Bitcoin to protect yourself against the slowly then suddenly scenario of currency devaluation, right? Protect yourself against the death of political currencies, not just for yourself, but for your family, for your community, for your church, for your company, and for the millions and tens of millions around the world that are using this, right? People in the developing world are using Bitcoin way faster than us in the developed world are because they understand this problem, right? And also when you do that, when you buy Bitcoin, you're not only protecting yourself individually, you're advocating against collective transition towards more sustainable energy grids to protect the world against these kinds of slowly then suddenly solar storms event, right? And also, as always, I encourage people to upgrade their Bitcoin self-custody. This is why I talk about collateral custody multisig. This is why I talk about protecting all these things. It's because this is another risk that many people in Bitcoin do not understand. We look back at the past when Bitcoin was a few dollars, $1, $5, $100, and we laugh at people or we feel the pain when people lost their Bitcoin because a criminal stole it for them, or because they lost it in a lawsuit, or because they had it on an exchange because they were naive and the exchange took it, right? All these things are extremely high downside risks with very small probabilities over long periods of time, okay? And we humans are not good at defining those kinds of risks, right? And so please, if you're watching this and you already have done this, you already own Bitcoin for your own individual interests, if you already own Bitcoin because you believe in pointing the world to its better direction, it is in your personal best interest and the world's best interest that you upgrade your Bitcoin self-custody immediately, right? Okay, there are dozens of these slowly then suddenly events you could very well be at risk to that you may not understand, right? Okay, what happens to your Bitcoin if you die? What happens to your Bitcoin if you're in a car accident, you forget where you hid your Bitcoin keys? What happens if you memorize your Bitcoin keys and you forgot them? What happens if you make a little treasure map for your wife, for your kid to find your Bitcoin in case you die, but they don't remember where it went, or you don't know where it went, or they lose it, or you lose it, or something, right? All these things could happen. What about a 6102 government attack where they try to confiscate your Bitcoin, right? You may think that's unlikely now, but this could very well happen. Even if it doesn't happen for the entirety, what if they decide that you are speaking anti-state speech or hate speech or other offensive speech and they decide to 6102 you specifically, right? What about economic crisis where you want to leave the country, as an economic refugee, right? What if that's going to happen, all right? This is something that I talk about all the time. Collateral custody multisig, there's jurisdictional arbitrage. You can have multiple keys in your vault in multiple countries, right? Many Canadians, I'm going to Canada in a few days for the Canadian Bitcoin conference. Speaking there, okay, many Canadian clients of mine have a key in Canada, a key in the United States, and a key in Australia to protect against these things, right? Because they understand that even though the risk of Canada trying to take my Bitcoin's low, you compound it out on a long enough time, and also many people happen to believe that risk is rising, they sleep at night knowing that, hey, I've got a key in the United States and a key in Australia protecting me against that downside, right? It also protects people against theft, right? It protects you against a $5 rent attack. And it protects you against someone logging into your account on an exchange and stealing your coins, right? This is also true of the lawsuit. If you have a significant amount of Bitcoin, or even if it doesn't feel like a significant amount now, it's going to increasingly be a significant amount, right? How do you protect against lawsuit? How do you make sure that your keys are in multiple countries so that if someone's going to sue you, which again is a very low probability over a long period of time with very high downside, now you can have your keys in multiple countries and you protect against that litigation because they have to come after you in multiple countries instead of one. It reduces, again, the incentive, right? And then, of course, lost keys is by far the most common thing I see personally when people have failed to upgrade their self-custody, right? So this is a quick rant about the importance of buying Bitcoin, advocating energy grid upgrade, and upgrading your self-custody. If you want to learn more about how to buy Bitcoin, or you want to learn more about how to upgrade your self-custody, of course, I'm going to talk about both River, a wonderful exchange, the one that I use, the one that I recommend. That link is in the description below. And of course, the Bitcoin Advisor that helps people achieve 0 single points of failure for their custody is also linked in the description below. And so you might get annoyed that I'm talking about this, but if you get annoyed and you're procrastinating these things and you don't have the answers to all these questions, well, then, my friend, you're doing the exact same problem I'm outlining in this video. You are accepting very high downside risk with a low probability over a long period of time and crossing your fingers that when the news hits, that you have the time to figure it out. My warning is, by the time the solar storm warning is here, you got 12 hours, you're out of time. Okay. By the time you realize that you've lost your keys, it's too late. By the time you realize that a thief is trying to get your hot wallet or trying to get SIM card swapped or trying to get in your exchange, it's too late. By the time you are aware of a 6102 coming or the eve of a 6102, it's already too late, right? So please do these things now, right? For you, for the world, and for your children, right? So again, like I just said, by the time we see these things, it's too late to act, okay? By the time governments announce the debasement of their currency, it is too late for you to exit your political currency to Bitcoin. By the time you realize your custody solution has single points of failure, by the time you internalize that fear, it's too late to upgrade it, right? So please do these things now and don't hear these 3 words, it's too late, right? Hopefully this emotional surge of the slowly then suddenly event of the solar storm encourages you to take action. Take action in trying to orange pill your loved ones and family. Take action in buying Bitcoin and getting off zero. And take action by getting a free consulting call, a free 38-page self-custody checklist, and a free 10-part video series, 5 hours worth of content about how to upgrade your Bitcoin self-custody to avoid these single points of failure, or as I'm jokingly referring to them today, self-custody solar flare events. Okay, you can do that at content.thebitcoinadvisor, advisor with the er.com/Luke Broyles, or you can find this link in the description below. Please fill it out. Please take action. Okay, because you don't know when the Carrington event of the world is going to happen, and you don't know when the Carrington event of your self-custody is going to happen. So there are a few other resources I'm going to point people to as we wrap up the video here. Let's see, this will load. Okay, you might remember this movie, Contagion, with Matt Damon, Jude Law, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kate Winslet. You might remember that movie. This was a movie from 2011. At the time, Bitcoin price was about $5 or so. I remember seeing this movie where I was 12 years old. I was 12 years old when I saw that movie in 2011. Bitcoin is $5. And I remember watching that movie, leaving the theater and thinking totally, yeah, that could happen. And not even a decade later, 9 years later, it happened, right? Unfortunately. And not only was the virus bad, the human response to the virus was equally as bad, and I would argue significantly worse, right? And so it's I don't want to be right. I don't want to think about these things. I don't want to talk about these things, but ultimately the best one can do is be an optimist and hope that we increase the incentive to think about these things. We increase the incentive to care about these things. Probably the most expensive lesson from COVID, from 2020, was that we were not accurately prepared beforehand. We didn't really have a plan. And so we just kind of winged it as everything fell into place, and we panicked because we realized we hadn't planned properly. And I'm concerned the same thing could happen with a solar flare. I'm concerned the same thing could happen with political currency debasement. That's why I talk about Bitcoin. That's why I make these videos. That's why I talk about self-custody and cloud custody multi-sig and getting off exchanges, all these things, because I believe the biggest mistakes are not the events themselves, but when people take action in the improper way. I've seen this all the time. A few months ago, there were some rumors of exchanges going down, and they didn't. But people, being panicked and thinking they only had a day or two to take action, attempted to take self-custody, but they accelerated their self-custody for Bitcoin beyond, they extended that beyond their education. And fortunately, there were many people I talked to that lost significant amounts of Bitcoin, right? Typically 5 figures or 6 figures worth of Bitcoin, but occasionally the 7-figure loss. And so it's the painful thing, right? That when humans don't have a plan, we procrastinate, we procrastinate, we procrastinate. They listen to Luke Broyles tell them that they're procrastinating. When they listen and they still do it, then when it happens, when it hits the fan, then they panic, then they overreact, and then that's when they make a mistake. And that's why it's important to do these things now. It's why it's important to have these discussions now. Nobody wants to talk about a potential of a solar flare in the future. Nobody wants to hear Luke talk about why you should buy Bitcoin because the dollar is going to fall in value, right? Nobody wants to talk about why it's important to get your Bitcoin off of exchanges. Don't buy the Bitcoin ETF, lock your self-custody down, get jurisdiction arbitrage and cloud custody multi-sig as at least a diversification for your self-custody setup. People don't want to hear any of these things. Okay, I get so many eye rolls. I get so many negative comments about all of these things, but they are really important. Nobody cares until everybody cares. And by the time everybody cares, it's too late for you to do anything because the only option left is panic. The people that are panicking will outbid you. They will panic over you, right? When you may not think you need toilet paper right now, but if you procrastinate getting that toilet paper, when the virus spreads and when the fear spreads, what's going to happen? Everyone's going to buy it up. People are going to be irrational, and they're just going to do whatever they perceive it takes to be prepared because they know they're not prepared, right? So please do all these things now. Get off zero, right? Now, I don't know if you all know Brett Weinstein. I have my personal disagreements with him. I'm not, endorsing everything he says, but there is a lot I definitely think is very interesting about he and his brother talk about, right? I've not met Brett Weinstein. I have met Eric Weinstein once, I think, maybe twice. No, just once, I think. So I met Eric, his brother, but I've not met Brett. But anyway, they both have really good content, and they are some of the people out there, pushing this message about the importance of protecting against EMP or CME, right? And this is, just to kind of touch on a bit of irony. Again, I think Brett makes a great point here. It's very amazing that we're not even talking about the risk to the world from solar storms. But we are talking about the aurora borealis, right? And obviously we could talk about that, but humans are even now are not having the proper emotional response to risk, and it's why the next 72 hours, a few days, are really important. So this is an article from Brett Weinstein on July 19th, 2021, and the article begins. I've read the article actually, and it begins with him, telling a story. Right in the first paragraph, he says the world began to end on the 12th of May, 2024, though another 390 years would pass before species finally went extinct, right? And of course, the example Brett's talking about here is compounding risks, right? That if anything's going to really have a problem with humanity, if anything's really going to cause us to go extinct, or at the very least kill large amounts of people, it's probably not going to be one event. It's probably multiple events combined together, right? And this is what we saw in 2020. It wasn't the virus that killed 18 million people. It was the virus compounded with the causes of starvation due to lockdowns, plus the political instability, plus the depression and alcoholism and suicides associated with that, all these things together, right? Plus children not going to school, plus this, plus that, right? It's all things combined, amplifying each other. That is what causes a true crisis, right? And I think, Brett's point about the solar storm potentially being one catalyst for a cascade of other things compounding on top of each other, I think is very possible. And I think it's terrifyingly possible. I think it's very ironic and kind of spooky that in his little hypothetical article here from a mere 3 years ago, he quote unquote predicted in this, again, story metaphor for May 12th, which is only one day later than today, right? And so that's something else that's important to mention. Okay, we only have had 7 solar storms so far hitting the world, but maybe we could have more. Again, like solar cycle. Okay, we still have at least another year of elevated solar activity. Like maybe right now is fine, but maybe in a few weeks, maybe in a few months, maybe in half a year, we could have a significant event like this, right? And even if it's not this solar cycle, and I pray it's not, it could be next one, or if not the next one, it could be the one after that, right? So I believe that's pretty much everything I have. So to wrap up, let's do the takeaways, right? 5 takeaways here. How we react to this event the next few days determines how much we prepare, because humans act on emotion, not logic. That's why the next 72 hours are critical. The emotional response you individually and the world collectively takes away from this event, that determines where we go in the future. And that's why I'm making this video, hopefully to have a lasting impression in you to take all of these slowly then suddenly events seriously. Okay. Second, our desire for unhealthy fear of doomsday ironically makes potential scenarios worse because we think things are out of control, right? When we are a part of climate alarmism, we actually are counterproductive to the environmentalism movement. When we make solar storms, sensational, or we make solar storms way more scary than they have to be, we reduce the action we take towards it because we throw our hands up and think it's hopeless, right? Some examples, okay? Solar storm, like what I'm mainly talking about this video, nuclear war in general, or nuclear war specifically, or war in general. These things are very applicable to it, right? Nuclear war is not the end of the world. It is the end of the modern world, right? Very similar to a solar storm. A solar storm is not the end of the world, but it's the end of the modern world, right? We like to dramatize these things. We like to dramatize these things, right? Disease is another one. We saw this, case in point, 2020, okay? Environmental problems, right? We see this all the time. We see people doomsdaying and overreacting to fear, right? Currency devaluation, right? It's entirely possible to think that the US dollar is not going to hyperinflate in the next year or two, or the next decade even. It's entirely possible to believe that, but also understand that it is going to have significant devaluation, right? And personal health is another one, right? On a personal level, I have friends that have died in the last year. I could die tomorrow. I could die today, right? Slowly and suddenly, like we none of us think we're going to die until we're already on a deathbed, right? And so even on an individual level, as an encouragement to you to take your life seriously, to enjoy the preciousness of life and the lives of your loved ones, right? Is that tomorrow is not guaranteed. And we really should take that very seriously, because all of these things are slowly then suddenly risks, very high downside, very low probability over a very long period of time, right? And eventually, some of these things, possibly all of these things, are going to manifest. And it's important we keep all things in mind, right? But because by the time it becomes evident that we're on the doorstep of one of these events, it is too late, right? If you're procrastinating buying Bitcoin because you do not think that that dollar is going to hyperinflate next year, if you're procrastinating buying Bitcoin for some other reason, you don't understand what kind of risk you're putting yourself in, right? And if you're procrastinating your Bitcoin self-custody, if you are not clicking on the link in the description below and setting up a free call with someone on the Bitcoin advisor team, and the link in the description below, if you're not doing that, then you are gambling your children's inheritance, right? If you have Bitcoin, you've not yet bought Bitcoin in your Roth IRA, if you've not yet bought Bitcoin in these things, and you're creating some sort of little treasure map or back of the napkin instruction manual for your wife or kids, I mean, goodness, I lovingly, I don't know what most Bitcoiners are doing. It's like, what are you doing? Like, how do you guarantee your family members will understand it? How do you guarantee they'll do it properly? How do you understand they'll care about doing it properly? And then, okay, let's say they do it successfully. Okay, let's say by the time you die or you pass on and they inherit that Bitcoin, it's worth $1 million, $5 million, $10 million worth of Bitcoin. Well, now you've put your family's large targets as large single points of failure against criminals and bad actors that want to come after them. And are your family members going to have the technical know how to deal with them? Probably not. And even if they do, you're still putting your family as a single point of failure target, right? This is why I talk about these things all the time. It's because we're not ready. We like to procrastinate all these things, right? And none of us understand slowly then suddenly really means that suddenly is too late, right? We all procrastinate talking about solar storms until we get alert Friday morning that 6 are going to hit in 7 hours, right? Well, now 7, right? It's just slowly then suddenly, don't procrastinate these things, right? So, okay, this is the takeaway. Take action. Take your health seriously. Life is not guaranteed. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. Lose weight. Quit smoking. Quit alcohol. Do the things you need to do, right? Number 2, buy some Bitcoin. Okay, protect against currency devaluation. Protect against political currency collapsing. Protect against these things. Buy Bitcoin. Get off zero. There's a link in the description to River. You can buy Bitcoin on River instantly. Extremely solid exchange, right? Extremely user-friendly. If you're new to buying Bitcoin, if you've bought Bitcoin, buy some more, right? And then 3, take self-custody, right? Do all the things I ranted about in this video. Upgrade your inheritance plan. Upgrade your estate plan. Protect against lawsuits. Protect and have your Bitcoin keys with jurisdictional arbitrage. Get cloud custody multi-sig. Get single sig. Get hot wallets. Get lightning wallets. Do all of these things. We can help. Link in the description. Bitcoin advisor, of course. Upgrade self-custody solution to 0 single points of failure, including for your wife and children. Otherwise, you will turn your wife and children into single points of failure when you pass on. Do you want that to be your legacy? I don't want that to be my legacy. And that's precisely why I talk about these things, because I don't think most Bitcoiners want that to be their legacy. That, yes, I kept my Bitcoin and I hodled my whole life, but then I gave it to my family and then they became the single points of failure, right? And then, of course, create a community of individuals around you. People that also care about these issues. People that also care about talking about these low time preference things and things that are pro-community, pro-energy, that understand that we don't have to be afraid of the things outside of our control, but we should have a healthy dose of fear for the things inside of our control to take action to minimize the downside consequences of the things outside of control. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, whatever you need to do to get this video out there. I appreciate your support. I hope you appreciate this rant. This was a bit more of an emotional one to me, one that I care about because I lived through 2020 as you did. I remember what that was like. I don't want to see that again. And we could easily have a significant number of people die if we don't take action now, if we don't let these emotional events the last 72 hours have a really solid place in our hearts and our minds so that we take action for the world. So buy Bitcoin, take self-custody, and understand this is not just for you, it's for the whole world.